All right, so this is our last section that we're going to do. Okay, there's actually 8 sections in this chapter, but I kind of taught you 4.8 before we even started this chapter, because 4.8 is all about imaginary numbers, and I taught you imaginary numbers in Unit 1. So normally, like, you would teach all of this without the imaginaries, and then suddenly, like, hey, here's an imaginary number. Let's go back and do everything all over again with imaginary, which we thought was kind of dumb. So kind of incorporated it, and I'm telling you, it went way faster this semester than I've ever taught this chapter. All right, so this is our last section. We're looking at a chapter test probably next Wednesday. Okay, so just kind of heads up, next Wednesday is what we're looking at. We're going to spend a couple days on this section. There's a lot in here just to make sure we got everything, and then we'll spend some time reviewing everything, kind of putting it all together. All right, so the goal for today is just looking at solving equations using that quadratic formula. How many of you guys know what the quadratic formula is? Maybe? Some of you? Maybe? And then tomorrow our main focus will be using the discriminant, which is part of that formula, to kind of tell a couple things about it. All right, so first I'm going to start with something that I'm not going to ask you to reproduce, but I was that student in school who was the why student. Why does we do that? Where did that come from? Like, I always wanted to know that. And I think there might be a couple of you in here who might be that why kid. Some of you are like, whatever, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, I don't care. Okay, but I was the why kid. So I want to show you kind of where all this comes from. So if we look at ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That's standard form, right? Everything we always do, we put in standard form and kind of go from there. I want you to solve that for x. So just like we always are, we're solving for x. But we're going to do it by completing the square. And I know there's no numbers up there. We're going to do it all with variables. Okay? So kind of hang with me. I'm going to go through this. Again, I'm not requiring you to regurgitate this for me later. I just want to show you where things come from. So if you want to write it down, you may. If you are like, I don't really need to write this down, that's fine. Also, totally up to you. But I want to show you kind of where this comes from. Yeah. Just in your notes. You don't need this on your pink sheet. All right. So if we're completing the square, what would be your first step? Move the c. Okay, so let's start with that. So we're going to have ax squared plus bx equals negative c, right? We have to subtract that to the other side. Okay, what was your next step? Good. And literally, it'll be by a this time. All right, so we have x squared plus b over a x equals negative c over a. All right, if it didn't divide, we just left it as a fraction. Okay, what was your next step? Good. B over a. And we divided it by 2. Do you remember how do you divide a fraction by 2? You multiply the bottom by 2. So really it becomes b over 2a. And then we had to square it. And we square the top, we square the bottom, right? So what's b squared? b squared. And what's 2a squared? What's 2 squared? So it'd be 4a squared. So that's what I'm going to add to both sides. Usually students are good with me to here, and then the next step is where I usually lose some people. Hang with me, okay? All right, and again, we did this whole process so that we can do what with this? We can factor it, right? So this will factor to something squared, right? How does it factor? Good. B over 2a and then squared. Good. So that's how it factored. You like the little side note now, don't you? Makes it easy to factor that. Over here is where I usually lose people because our fraction skills aren't always so great. If I want to combine these, what must you have? Common denominators. All right, so this one's a 4a squared. Can I turn this one into a 4a squared? Yeah. What would you have to multiply a by to make it 4a squared? 4 and a. I can't multiply by a squared. But a times a is a squared. So I'm going to have to multiply this one by 4a to make it have the same denominator as this one. I'm just going to write it over here for sake of ease in writing this. All right, so this will give me the 4a squared on the bottom. And 4a times negative c is negative 4ac. Again, this just is, I'm trying to find common denominators so I can actually put my fractions together. So that's what I'm doing there. So I can write all of this over 4a squared. So on the top, b squared minus 4ac. Are those like terms? No, they're not like terms. So I'm just going to stay b squared minus 4ac on the top. Okay, so all I did was just get common denominators. I put that together. All right, what would be your next step? Square root. Remember, we do the top and we do the bottom. So we get x plus b over 2a equals plus or minus. On the top, I can't really do much with this, so that's going to stay the square root of b squared minus 4ac. On the bottom, what's the square root of 4a squared? 2a. Again, I'm not asking you to recreate this. I'm just trying to show you where something came from. And then to get x by itself, we subtract that over there. So negative b over 2a plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. To clean it up just a smidge more, do you see how they're both over the same denominator? So negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Does that look familiar to anybody? You seen that formula before? That's the quadratic formula. That's where it came from. So the quadratic formula is really just completing the square. That's where it came from, right? I completed the square on standard form, and that's how I got the quadratic formula. So really, it's completing the square over and over and over and over again when you're using this formula, but it's the simplified version where I can just plug numbers into a formula, and bam, there's my answer. Okay, but I wanted you to see where it came from. Like, it's important to people. All right, this formula, you do need to memorize this. On your pink sheet, on the pink sheet, you have that last column. So on your pink sheet, you're going to write, the first thing you're going to write is set equal to 0. So your equation needs to be set equal to 0. Right? Standard form, so you may want to write on here ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Do you see where the a, the b, and the c are coming from in the formula? Right, all these letters that you're plugging in here, they're coming from, there's your a, there's your b, there's your c. Right? So you're going to set equal to 0, make sure it's in standard form. Okay, your next step after that is going to be to plug a, b, and c into, and then here's where you're probably going to want to write your formula. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So plugging everything in, not doing any math at that step, I'm just plugging all my numbers in. After you plug everything in, you're going to want to clean up under the radical. And then simplify. Depending on your problem, that could look like a lot of different things. Now, I'm going to be real nitpicky on this formula, you guys, because it means something different if you don't write it correctly. Notice the radical. Do you see how long that radical is? If you write in your problems and this radical does not cover everything underneath here, I'm taking a point off. Because if you would stop this radical here, that means something totally different than carrying the radical over the whole thing. Okay, so be careful. Notice this fraction bar is underneath everything on the top. It needs to be underneath everything because it means something different. If I would not write it underneath this minus b, then I would be taking this number and then this answer divided with this, which is not the same thing. So be very careful how long that fraction bar is as well. Okay? All right. I have a lot of different things that you can use to listen, to learn. For sake of time, I'm only going to show you one of them today. Tomorrow we can look at more of them. We'll look at those tomorrow. The one that I usually play the most that's really annoying, and I really like it because it's so annoying, is Pop Goes the Weasel. Isn't that great? You don't like it? Yeah. No, you won't this time. I promise you. No, you try. No? All right. You guys do need to memorize that formula. We got to memorize it, okay? Hopefully, some of you probably already have it memorized, but I know it's annoying, but the sing-songiness really does help you memorize it. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's practice it. See if we can make this thing work. A couple of you said you failed this before. You will not fail it again, I promise you, okay? All right, so first thing, what do I have to do with it? Set it equal to 0. You have to set it equal to 0 first. So we're going to have x squared plus 3x minus 2 equals 0. Okay, so we got to put it in standard form, set equal to 0. Just to make sure we're good, can you tell me what your a, your b, and your c are? What's a? No. What's a? 1. What a is the number in front of x squared, so it's going to be a 1. Your b value? And your c? Negative 2. Be careful with your signs. Okay, if there's a minus with it, it means it's negative. Okay, so we're going to plug everything into our formula. I'm not doing any math at this step, okay? So we're going to write x equals negative b. What would negative b be? Negative 3. The negative sign could also be read as opposite of b, so you're just always going to change that sign. So this is 3, so it'll become negative 3. Plus or minus square root. Very, very, very important, especially those of you who are calculator dependent. Put your numbers in parentheses, okay? So when I plug stuff in, b squared, it's going to be 3 squared. Because in a calculator, if that is a negative number and you square it without parentheses, you get a different answer you don't want. So get in the habit, just throw parentheses around it. Minus 4 times my a, which is 1, my c, which is negative 2, all over 2 times a. Okay? Write that step down. Don't try to just type everything in your calculator, because then when you mess up, I can't see what you did. Okay? All right, so your next step is literally, I'm just cleaning up under the radical. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus radical. Do not type the radical in your calculator. Don't hit square root of anything. Just type in the numbers. 3 squared with parentheses minus 4 times 1 times negative 2. And what do we get? You should get 17. Again, double check, guys. Grab a calculator, type it in. Let's make sure that we're getting this stuff to work. So if you have errors with how you're typing stuff in, everything's going to be messed up. Again, I did not type the radical in my calculator. All over 2 times 1, which is 2. Okay, so I just cleaned up under that radical, cleaned up a few things. And then my next step is just to simplify. Can you do a factor tree on that radical 17? Nope. Can you simplify any of your numbers or anything? I'm done. I mean, some get a little trickier, and we got some, simplifying to do. Doing okay so far? Stephanie, are you still scared? All right, how about the next one? What's your first step? Subtract the 2. All right, we got to set it equal to 0 first. So x squared minus 2x plus 8 equals 0. All right, what's your a value? Your b? Your C. Just so you know, this costume this dog's wearing, my dog has this costume. Sorry, side note. Okay, here we go. So x equals negative b. Yes, a negative b in this case, since it's already negative, is going to make that a positive 2 plus or minus square root. Make sure that's a long enough radical so everything's underneath it. B squared, again, please put those numbers in parentheses, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 8, all over 2 times a. Okay, plug in your numbers in. Make sure they're in parentheses. All right, let's clean up underneath the radical. So we get 2 plus or minus radical negative 28. Negative 28 all over 2. All right, we got to talk about a couple things at this step. Okay. Some students like to simplify and divide by 2 because they're like, oh, look, a 2 and a 2, right? That's what they like to do. You can't. When we're looking at simplifying, what number is in front of this radical right now? There's a 1 here, right? Anytime you simplify with this, because we got a couple pieces going on the top, you would have to simplify all 3 of these numbers, right? The 2 numbers at the top and the bottom number. If all 3 of them can't be simplified by the same thing, you can't simplify. Just these 2, do not simplify, okay? You'd have to do, it's kind of like I got to be fair, right? I got to be fair to everything every time. I have to be fair to both of the numbers on the top. If I'm dividing by 2, they got to do both of them. I can't just do one of them. All right, can I simplify this? Yeah. If I do a factor tree here, good. So 2 plus or minus, that'll be 2i radical 7 over 2. Now can you simplify them all? All 3 numbers. 1, 2, 3. Can they all be divided by 2? Yes. Yes, they can. So you're going to get x equals 2 divided by 2 is 1. Don't tell me it cancels. That is a 1. Plus or minus 1i, or just I, radical 7 all over 1. Do I need the over 1? No. So 1 plus or minus I radical 7. So again, if you're going to simplify, it has to be all 3 numbers. Don't forget there is an unspoken 1 in front of that radical if you don't see it. Questions on that one? Mm-hmm. If there was a negative, like down here, if there was a negative? Typically your negatives, you write them on the top. So if like one of these was negative and one wasn't, when I divide, this one would stay negative. What if you divide by a negative here? What happens to this since there's already a plus minus in front of it? Does it matter? Yeah. Plus minus and negative, I already got both signs accounted for. It doesn't really matter. Okay, take a look at this one. X squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Ramon? Good. B? C? Side note, my dog has that costume too. All right, so x equals mm-hmm. all over mm-hmm. Okay, but you got 0 when you cleaned up underneath there? Okay, all over 2. All right, let's talk real quick. You guys like to leave radical 1 stuck on the thing all the time, right? What's the square root of 0? It's 0. So really I have x equals negative 6 plus or minus 0 over 2. Remember about before, anytime you had like all numbers, I made you put them together? right? You didn't just leave it like 2 plus or minus 5. You actually had to put them together. Same idea here. There's no radical. There's no I. I have to keep going with this. So what's negative 6 plus 0 divided by 2? It's negative 3. Negative 6 minus 0 divided by 2, negative 3. So technically my two answers is negative 3 twice. Would you have to list it twice? No, you could just list it once. Right, but yeah, again, just like before when we were solving, if you didn't have a radical and you didn't have an I, actually tell me what your two answers are, because they're like terms. Okay, how about the next one? What do you do first? Add the 5. So 5x squared plus 8x plus 5 equals 0. A? No, he does not have that one. That one's funny, though. All right, so A is 5, my B, 8, C, 5. All right, so x equals negative B, negative 8, plus or minus square root B squared, so 8 squared, minus 4. So A is my 5, my C, another 5, all over 2 times A, 5, a lot of 5s. Right, so just plugging all my numbers in. What am I going to do next? Clean up underneath. So negative 8 plus or minus radical negative 36. You guys concur? I'm trusting you there. Over 10. Can I do anything with that radical? Take an I out. So what is it going to actually become here? 6i. So negative 8 plus or minus 6i over 10. Am I done, or do I have to do anything else? Jacob? Yes, technically I'm doing a GCF. I can divide them all by 2. And again, it has to be all 3 numbers. Take a look. Can you do all 3 numbers by something? Yeah. So x equals, and divide them all by 2. So we get negative 4 plus or minus 3i all over 5. Now, are these like terms that I should like keep going with this, or do I have to stop? Why? Good. Like, because back here, I kept going, right? And I got 2 answers. Why don't I keep going here? There's an I. It's not like terms with the 4. I can't do anything else. So you'd stop there. Okie doke. You guys want to try one on your own? All right, give it a go. All right, so it was already set equal to 0. What was your A? B? C? All right, so we have x equals negative B will become negative 4 plus or minus square root all over 2 times 1. All right, so double check, make sure you at least plugged everything in correctly. And then when we clean up underneath my radical, because that's your next step, oh, my board fell asleep. What do we get underneath the radical? 28. Sorry, give me 1 sec. My board fell asleep. Every once in a while it does that. The board will freeze. Give it a second. It'll turn green again in a minute. Or it usually does. Fell asleep longer than normal today. Yeah. It normally doesn't stay asleep that long. No, it usually just takes a second and it'll come back.